What could you help us to understand the level of grief that we're all experiencing on the planet right now?
I think you're right. I think it's about everyone on the planet right now. It's not who has more and who has less. What this is teaching us is about the lesson of human despair. And what do we do with despair? What do we do when we're grieving over the feeling that what might have been has been lost, or what might be discovered is maybe not findable? And I think that this is bringing us back to what I learned over the years, is that my art and my story, all of it came from, as an actor in Hollywood, I found that I was in a profession that demanded certain things and certain behavior and certain questions. And to go beyond, in a sense, that agreement, I realized I would have to do on my own. I'd have to create a place where I'd say, at least here, let's talk about these things. Let's give them space, not to convince the world of something, but to remind ourselves of something. And so I started collecting books. I became a great lover of books and of the conversation because I felt, we've inherited this remarkable story of being human. And if we look closely at it, we look closely at our arts and our music, this is really, we're looking at the question, well, what do I do with the despair? What do I do when in other ages I've lost my family, or I've lost my kingdom, or everyone I knew has been killed? What do I do when I realize that I'm not going to get out of that difficulty? I'm going to be undone by it. And then we start to look from the DNA that we're woven of the human story. It means we're woven of a type of grief, a type of sorrow, a type of trauma that isn't personal. It's uniquely expressing itself through each of us. And if we understand the world has 7 billion human beings, think of that as our body, 7 billion cells, each with its own membrane, its own qualities, but part of a larger organism. And every cell in that organism is saying, what do I do with the despair? I thought it would be different than it is, and I find being human is so very difficult, and I don't know what the reward is. But when we step back, and this is what I'm trying to find now for all of us, is a sense of a willingness to step back into our primary technology. Our willingness as storytellers to realize once again that it's the stories we tell that transform us. And if our stories are about hatred and anger and war and politics, we cultivate a world that is surrounded by these things. And we are surrounded by these things. So it says if this is a weather condition of the fear, the despair of the outer world, but that fear and despair has in one way or another over the ages always been present, then it's not to change that, it's to finally say, that's the alchemy, that's the raw canvas. That's what we start our work with. And when we look at it from the library's perspective, or the story of what does it mean to be human, which needed all the books in the library, all the ages, all the races, all the religions, because they are all human, then we start to say, oh, I understand. It is not whether my neighbor has more despair than I do or had a more difficult time than I did. We're all faced with the challenge of how do I encounter this world and not blame the world? How at the end of life, when I'm old, have I not become so angry at the world? I have not died when I died because I died long ago because I gave up on things. And I think this is where we're at now. It's saying that, like I found years ago, that we have to create the place where these things matter. And it's not to convince the neighbor. They don't care. They don't have time to care. But you care. I care. So if we say between us, this is the relationship that will allow these things to join us. That's what happened here at Olandar, at my home. Over almost 40 years of having discussion groups here every week, saying at least here, let's honor the fact that we're really the outcome of a remarkable species that in spite of its despair, said, I choose to love. I choose to reconcile the irreconcilable with music, with beauty, with poetry. And at the end of the day, when we can't convince our neighbor, to turn back to those we love and say, maybe I don't need to convince you. I need to be responsible and to love you. And in so doing, free the inner spirit to grow from within each of us 7 billion individuals so that the body rises and says, yes, it's good to be alive. We don't need to venerate death anymore because we're not afraid. That's what I do with the despair and the grief. We've done it before, and we're always doing it. We're the human form divine. I'm a great cheerleader for that. I really do believe we are learning to say yes rather than yikes.